Welcome. Today you'll hear a conversation I had with doula and birth attendant Carissa Douglas. Carissa and another doula that will be coming on the podcast in a little bit here run a birth story sharing circle in Vancouver, and that is how we met for the first time. I went to this circle to share one of my birth stories, and I go all the time now because they're just wonderful. In this conversation, we discuss what is happening with the British Columbia College of Nurses and Midwives right now, and the limitations of our current obstetrical system, the importance of taking radical responsibility, among other things. If you are local to the Lower Mainland, I highly recommend coming to these birth circles. You can find details about them on Carissa's social media pages, which she shares at the end of the podcast, and which you can also find in the show notes. Enjoy. Hey, Carissa.
Hi, Melissa.
So nice to chat with you today. Why don't you start? Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you came to birth work?
I would love to. So I am a full spectrum doula, working in all aspects of pregnancy, reproduction, so preconception, pregnancy and birth, postpartum, also abortion and loss. I've been doing that for 5 years this year, which is kind of wild how time flies. And I came to this work through my educational background was in social work. So I kind of learned what doulas and midwives were more like in greater detail when I was doing like a women in health class. And I was like, wow, imagine how cool it would be to be able to be at someone's birth and watch a baby be born. I just thought that was like the coolest sounding thing in the world. And in my family, I have 8 nieces and nephews. So by the time I was 13, my eldest sister had her first, and then my family, very fertile. They they have lots of babies. So
Nice.
yeah, I've just been around babies my whole life and just loved being around them and holding them. And that was kind of my like in my mind when I was younger, I was like, wouldn't it be amazing if you could just have a job where you just hold babies all day?
Yep.
And so I've kind of manifested that for myself a little bit. So postpartum is a lot of baby holding, and I love that.
It is great. I remember when I did my first doula training, the trainer said, if you're getting into this because you like babies, get out, because that's not what this is. And I was like, oh no. No, it is, though. There is a lot of holding
There
babies.
is a lot of holding babies, and it's so true that when I initially took some doula trainings, it really wasn't, it was like, oh, yeah, babies are cute, but the birth part really called to me.
Yeah.
And that, being with people in these really transitional times and, offering that anchor of support was really, um, yeah, it was something that really called to me. But then I realized, yeah, postpartum is a lot of holding babies, and people really, they want to know that their babies are safe
Mhm.
and being loved so that they can really just detach for a moment and go have like their own, individual human moments by themselves, whether it's to go have a shower or to go just drink a cup of coffee in its entirety while it's hot.
Yeah. It is the nicest thing when someone holds your babies the way you wanna hold your babies, and that
Mhm.
they sense that, like, magical, um, aura that comes off a baby, like, smell their little heads,
Mhm.
and, like, when someone else does that with your baby, it's like, that's soul food. I love
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, so should we jump right into, like, BCCNM? And
Absolutely.
yeah.
Let's
S
do it. I'm ready.
Yeah. So things have been happening. We were sort of talking about, like, globally, it seems like things are happening,
Yeah.
um, like fighting birth work, like authentic birth work,
Mhm.
and often coming from the people we thought were protecting birth work.
Mhm.
And recently in British Columbia, British Columbia College of Nurses and Midwives has been sending out letters um, to birth workers, to birth attendants, um,
Mhm.
telling them they're practicing illegal midwifery, and like making it's scary, like making
Mhm.
threats toward these birth keepers, in what they're offering to women.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so let's get into that.
Yeah. It's a perfect time to get fired up on a Friday morning.
Yes. Yeah, this one fires me up.
Absolutely. It really does feel like another variation of the witch hunt,
Yeah.
right? Where they came after, and they being, sort of the powers that be in society, are coming after the wise women, the medicine women, the people that are truly committed to supporting families and communities and offering support in the ways that they need and
Yeah.
not expecting them to just bend to a system that is so uninterested in being flexible for them in return and offering them care and support that is really suited to you know, their families and their um just their lifestyle and things that are really important to them. Um and I think it has to be noted as well that some of these advisories that have been posted are women of color. And
Yeah.
this has been going on for so long, basically since, the early 1900s, when the shift in, the middle class and the medical system was sort of coming to be what it is now. There was this whole campaign against a lot of midwives who were women of color, who were bringing cultural practices and supporting the families in rural areas that, were having their babies and really needing that support. And there was so much wisdom passed on traditionally. And this whole system of care that was being organized communally was completely obliterated by just like smear campaigns, just really horrific things that they would say about these midwives, about like them being immigrants, and that they were like things I don't even want to repeat because I don't think
Yeah.
it's even worth, I think people just know what kind of racist
Yeah.
stuff would be coming from a, white male centric medical system. And that continues to this day. And so just I really want to acknowledge that some of these women that are being impacted by this are, people who are really reconnecting to their cultural
Yeah.
practices and bringing that knowledge to families who are looking for it here, who are wanting that care and support that isn't provided by the medical system, and who, let's be clear, they're consciously choosing these people, right? Like nobody is
Mhm.
going and being like, oh, I'm a midwife, but like don't look too close into me because I'm not registered, or like no one's claiming this title. It's like the BCCNM, you've taken the word midwife, like it's already been done, you've had it for 20 plus years. Let that be that. But you don't get to police the language, like around birthkeeper, saying that birthkeeper is too close to midwife. Like, no, you didn't take that on. So it's not yours to lay claim to now. And it's also not yours to police the way that you're doing,
Yeah,
so making these advisories.
I see, like, the problem, like, okay, like, I was gonna say twofold, there's many parts of the problem here, but part of it so, like, in BC, women have the choice when they're pregnant, or, like, the choices they're aware of are you can get a doctor, you can get a family doctor in BC to follow your pregnancy and then catch your
Hmm.
baby, or they would say deliver your baby, but as we know, like,
Hmm.
only someone who is pregnant can deliver a baby,
Hmm.
right? Or you can get an obstetrician, usually just if you're high risk, but some obstetricians take on primary care. Or you can get a registered midwife.
Hmm.
And our sort of thought is that a registered midwife is going to provide you with that holistic, natural home birth, beautiful care. And
Hmm.
that's often not true,
Hmm.
because the midwives are being trained as little obstetricians now. So you might get a midwife,
Yeah.
who's really authentic and wanting to practice holistic midwifery, but honestly, probably not. And even
Hmm.
if you do get that midwife, midwives
are registered. And so they have to keep that registration. And to do that, their loyalty must lie with their college. They have to keep hospital privileges. They have to keep the obstetricians happy. And so when it comes down to it and a choice has to be made, the midwife has to choose her license. So it's not exactly what we think sometimes when we think we're getting a midwife. The other piece of that is, even if you do want a midwife and you're happy with that kind of care and you're fully informed to know that this midwife works for the state, there aren't that many compared to like how many people would like midwifery care in BC. So 2 problems there. It's not really what you think it is. And if you're informed and you know, you might not get one unless you are like privileged enough to know you are pregnant at like the day your period is supposed to come, right? Like 4 weeks pregnant, and you get in there right away, you probably won't get one, right? And that requires a certain level of like privilege and education and like body knowledge and just like a regular cycle and all these things that some women don't have. And so all of this leads women to either have births they didn't really want, right? Not births they didn't want, but like births happening in ways they didn't want with people they didn't want to invite. Or their other option is to birth outside the system. So to birth with no registered professional there, no arbiter of the government, nobody working for the state, maybe just you and your partner, but maybe you'd like to have a wise woman with you. And so that's where BCCNM is coming down on these wise women who we've always had in our communities. Used to be what we would call a midwife, I guess, but now that term means something different now. That term means registered midwife trained by the college and registered with the College of Midwives, different thing. And that is not what these birth keepers are practicing. They're not practicing medical midwifery in that way. They are women who hold space for other women. And like you said, the last piece of this weirdness is the way the college is coming down on these women, right? In the press releases saying, warning, these women are practicing illegal midwifery, don't be duped. And really, when you go out to hire someone outside the system, there could be no accident. I mean, all of our healthcare is covered in BC, and you're going to spend a lot to get a birth keeper to come and attend your birth. It's not an accident. They're kind of hard to find, right? Because of the witch hunt thing going on. So it's very intentional. It's adult women making autonomous choices about their body and who they would like to attend their birth. Yeah. So speaking of free birth, do you find is that on people's radar? Do you find like when you get a new client, are they thinking about that?
I would say it's there's like 2 sides of the spectrum. There's not really a middle gray area that I've experienced. It's either people have no idea or they hear about it and they're like, "Oh God, like absolutely not." Or it's very much on their mind and it's
Yeah.
very much a part of why they're seeking out doula care, is that they want to have a free birth. They don't want to invite any, registered, like you say, arbiter of the state. I love that so much. But they don't want to be alone in that space. They don't necessarily just want it to be their partner. So what they're looking for is very much the same as what people are looking for when they're having either a home birth or a hospital birth with registered care providers. They want somebody to be there to support them through the process and help them really, stay calm and stay grounded and feel safe and feel comfortable. But they are taking really radical responsibility for their birth, and they are recognizing what the risks look like, but also seeing that the risks that they're comfortable taking are not the ones maybe the majority are comfortable taking. So, in October of last year, Global News came out with a report that was saying that 1 in 6 people leave the hospital with severe maternal trauma.
Yeah.
So that's either postpartum hemorrhage, tearing, like cervical tearing, from instrumental birth. And so when we're looking at the stats and we're seeing, how many people are being induced simply because they've gone over 40 weeks, how many people are receiving intervention that is unnecessary simply because the time or for efficiency or for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with the actual physiologic process, and then are ending up with really traumatic births. People are like, 1 in 6 is too high. Like, if I look at, the chances of something catastrophic happening in my pregnancy or birth, if I'm outside of the system, those numbers are incredibly low and incredibly rare. So when we're looking at, what is more likely to happen, you're more likely to end up with some, severe bodily trauma and emotional trauma. So people
Yeah.
are like, absolutely not. I want to go in a different direction. So, the people that are aware of this are absolutely aware of this, and they're seeking out care because they're like, who's going to be someone who's comfortable supporting me in this space?
Do you find, so of clients that you meet, are they choosing, so if they're thinking about birthing outside the system, birthing, free birthing, having a sovereign birth, is it first-time parents or is it someone who's experienced some trauma in the obstetrical system and is looking for something different? Like, why are they free birthing?
Mm-hmm. It's also a mixture of both. I've had lots of parents like first time, well, I wouldn't say lots, but like
Mhm.
I've connected with quite a few first time parents who either have some kind of trauma from a hospital experience in their lives prior to this, or just a really incredible sense of like bodily attunement and recognition that they know that that won't be supported in that process there. And so they're like, no, I can't even take a step into the hospital because I know what is going to happen to me there because of all the stories that you hear. And, I think we all sort of understand this as a society. We're really not good at dealing with our trauma. So pregnant people often put that onto other pregnant people when they're like, oh,
Yeah.
well, you better get this or you better do that, or this is what happened to me, or my sister's cousin's best friend's so and so had this so horrific trauma in birth, like, just so you know. And you're like, whoa, we shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be laying that at the feet of somebody who's about to go through this transition. Um, but that I think creates for some, it creates a sense of fear where they're like, oh, we have to be in the hospital because think of all the things that could go wrong, not recognizing that a lot of times it's things that are introduced that then create the cycle of things that need to be managed and intervened with. And it's like if you had have just like left that alone to begin with, you probably wouldn't end up with all of these interventions. Like the research really clearly shows the cascade. Once you do one, you're so much more likely to need all the others.
Yes, even once you
Um,
look for one, like there's no problem, but it's like, let's just go for an ultrasound. Let's just get an NST just to see.
yes.
And the just to see is like, I'm going to look for a problem. And guess what happens when you look for something? You find something that's often not
hmm
even there, is the problem.
hmm
Yeah.
There's a great example of that in gestational diabetes. So Dr. Rachel Reed, who I think is probably like, a,
I love her.
a very important person in the birth world. Um, she has an article talking about how the research actually shows that the problems that stem from having a big baby actually stem from care provider bias versus an actual big baby. So it really does, as you're saying, illustrate how much power the idea of, oh, there might be a problem, so we should probably just, proactively take care of it now
Our minds are
instead
so
of,
powerful.
yeah.
So,
And of course, you are biologically hardwired when you are pregnant to protect your baby with everything that you have. So if somebody that you've put your trust and care and like really come vulnerably to, and you believe that they have your best interest at heart, and you don't understand how the system works, and you don't understand where the loyalties lay as far as the liability and whatnot, then the things that they tell you are going to really read as gospel to you. Like, oh, well, I have to do this, of course, like my baby's in peril.
yes,
And a
and we're
lot of
taught, like, what
times,
could I know? What could I know? Like, I've never been pregnant, or I have, but not this time, and, like, they see all these pregnant people, And the evidence just doesn't support that. Like, who could know
Mhm.
the best? The woman growing the baby. You go inside, right? And you talk to your baby and you feel the knowing that so transcends any knowing that could come from a book, sits inside all of us. And especially
Mhm.
when you're pregnant and birthing a baby. And like, let's talk about that. Like,
Mhm.
you and I had talked earlier about like birth as a framework for transformation and the rite of passage that
Mhm.
it is. And like, so what's
Mhm.
happened? Like, yeah, let's talk about that.
Mhm. I I love to talk about this. It's like my favorite subject, and anyone who knows me knows that at some point or another, birth will come up in any conversation about anything that has to do with some kind of transformational process. And it really does illustrate so much of what, like a growth moment can look like. There's always contraction, and then there's always a bit of
Yeah.
a break, and there's always, this sort of push pull into, something that you're really being moved through and pushed towards in life. And there's something so important and vital to be present for that process because it is supporting you in tuning into your instincts, knowing your own body, recognizing the way that your body communicates to you. This is such a time of like massive creativity. Like you are engaged in the process of creation every single day. And, our society really doesn't support that at all. It doesn't even, give any credence to that process. It's like, oh, well, you're pregnant. So, like, don't eat bean sprouts or cured meats and go to the doctor every couple of months and then, let someone like pry your baby out of you at the end of it all. Like, there's no space for like you to reconnect with your instincts and your intuition that is going to really serve you for your entire parenthood journey. Because, like, the hospital does not give an F about what happens when you go home. They're just
Yeah,
like,
you're
hey,
the
here's
only
the
one to sit with
rules.
that. You take the
Yeah.
trauma home. You take the baby home. Like, who cares about this baby? Just
Yeah,
sleep.
they don't care what you're doing when you're home other than they have to just tell you, "Well, don't sleep with your baby and don't do this with your baby and wake your baby up every 2 to 3 hours," and, like, all of these rules, but then they're like, "Well, you're on your own." Like, "Our hands are clean. We've done our job. We've kept you and your baby alive."
Checked all the
Yeah.
boxes. Yeah, did all the things. Whereas pregnancy and birth, like are actually this like microcosm of transformation. Like we're saying, like it's
Mm,
the way
mhm,
that we move through into motherhood. And like every time, even if you've already done it once, every
yes.
time you like gain this right. And the thing I think that happens in our obstetrical system is we abdicate our power to
Mhm.
a man, usually, right? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's like it's the patriarchal system, right? We
Yeah.
abdicate our power and we're told you don't know. Oh, you thought you were fine, you're not. You have low fluid, whatever thing comes up. Um,
Mhm.
and that you have to wait and be told how to take care of yourself. And when we do that, birth does feel violating. It does. It feels like it's
Mhm.
happening to you and it's scary. And um and you lose that. And that is like our divine cosmic gift as women that we're given,
Mhm.
is this, and it's not the only way to do it. I don't think you have to have a child to enter that stage of your life. There's many things we
Absolutely
can
not.
birth, but birth
Mhm.
just offers this thing you can't wiggle out of. Like you must do
Mhm.
it. Once you are pregnant, the baby's going to come out, right? And
Mhm.
like you can't wiggle away, and you just have this opportunity to explore yourself and who you are in those moments, and then to come through the
Mhm.
transformation. And when you come through with power, when you know, like, I made these decisions, I did it myself. No one saved me. I saved myself. I did
Mhm.
it. I know what needs to happen for this baby. Right. And then when you come to motherhood and you have like the first fever, that's scary and awful. Your baby's sad. But when
Mhm.
there's a connection between coming through your birth with power and embracing your intuition and being able to embrace that in motherhood. And again,
Yes.
that's not the only way, but it's the way to do it without needing to process trauma later.
Hmm. Like how many people are, in their very delicate postpartum time, so vulnerable that are struggling with postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression. And, again, we also, as a society, are not good at showing up for new families. We live in such an individualistic society. People are really terrible at knowing what to do. They come
Mhm.
over and they're like, great, let's meet the baby, let's hold the baby. And, like, as someone who's newly given birth, you're like, give
Yeah.
me my baby back. Like, I don't want to be separated from my baby. So again, there's this instinct injury that happens. So it's not just that you're physically injured or that you're emotionally injured. It's that you are deeply instinctually injured by some of the processes that are happening in the birthing spaces in the hospital and the medical industrial complex. So how do we move away from that and support people being healthy, being, emotionally intact, instinctually intact, physically intact with their babies who this is an imprint on a human being for the rest of their lives. Like what happens in that birth space impacts the rest of their lives. Like my own mother has shared with me my birth story. And, it was always kind of funny. Like we would laugh about it. And she would tell me when I was younger that there was this like nurse in the room who was, I'm the fourth, was trying to tell her like your baby's not coming soon, like get into bed. And, this was like almost like 37 years ago in England. And she, when my mom finally was like, get out of the room, like sent her away because she's like, I know when my baby is coming. Like, don't tell me that I don't know what's happening in my own body. And so, like, props to my mom for being like totally in her own power in that moment. But something that I came to realize later as I was doing a lot of deep personal work was something about the presence of doubt in my life and doubting my ability to move in directions or doubting my ability, to follow my own instincts. And as I've done this like really deep energetic work, I've really traced that back to starting in that space when I was being born. There was this heavy presence of doubt about what I knew and my mom knew. We both knew it together, and she had to divert her attention and focus on, you know, eliminating this energy from the room in order for me to be born safely. And it's like that is a energetic signature that I carry with me that I, have needed to work through in my life. And I think that speaks to just my own, I am a person that really is engaged in deep personal work. Just, I'm attracted to that. And that's kind of part of my process in this lifetime. But it's something that is so a part of who I am and my essence. And not a lot of people necessarily can go there or know those things, but it's like that's something in your blueprint that stays with you for your whole life.
Yep, I think so I've had 2 births outside the system now and then 1 in hospital, the first one, um, and that was one of the reasons the second time, I didn't have any midwifery care at all. I had a midwife for the middle one, um, and okay, so registered midwives are mostly, like, the loveliest people. Like, I
Hmm.
have so many friends that are registered midwives, and I think they're delightful, but the
Hmm.
way that they have to practice is to, like, bring to you all of this risk. And it's part of the
Hmm.
informed consent conversation that surrounds risk, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so spending time in pregnancy being like, "No, thanks, I don't want that." They're like, "Someone might die." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I'll look at it, but, like, I don't think I want that," right? And to constantly have to go and I had really nice midwives, like, really nice people. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and to constantly have to go and look at, like, the negative of everything terrible that could happen, and then, ultimately decline it for me, like, look at the risk and be like, "I don't think it's not there, I don't see the evidence for it."
Hmm.
Um, and I know from having friends that are midwives that often when they're birthing themselves, they're declining all of this too. But when they are taking on a new client, they have to share these things, right? And it's just so much, um, you spend so much time in self-advocacy, and that's just a piece, like, I don't wanna do in pregnancy anymore. I don't wanna
Hmm.
spend time in that. I have confidence in my knowing. And I definitely don't want to do that in labor. Like, that is so not the place and time. And that is what you have to do in labor if you're in a hospital, or even if you have a midwife in your home, because she has to share these things with you, right? She's got to go through the checklist.
And I think you make such a good point about that it's not an individual problem. You know, these registered midwives, like, yeah, they're great and they got into this work because they really want to help families. But they are being asked to do their jobs with their hands tied behind their backs. They cannot actually serve families in the way that families deserve to be served or are asking to be without putting themselves at risk of losing their licenses. And there's certain things that make sense in terms of if you're registered and you're a clinical practitioner, like these are the things you need to offer and say. But there also is ways in which you can approach these conversations with language that isn't as like, oh, well, we're just going to do this now. Or, like this it doesn't leave room for, oh, do I have a choice in this? You're like, oh, okay, I guess I'll just accept that because you've said that we're doing it. And, it's not until afterwards that people are like, wait a second, I wish I had have declined that.
People don't
But
even realize they can decline.
no.
I had this one midwife who's just like the unicorn midwife. Actually, I know a couple of them, but this one that was in that I had care with, she asked me if I wanted to have a 20-week ultrasound, and she's like, "Would you like that?" And I was like, "What?" Like, of course. Like by this time I'd been in birthwork for like 12 years, and I had worked for midwives forever, and I was like, we're having a discussion about that, and I was like, "Well, I guess everybody gets it, right?" And she's like, "Yeah, a lot of people get it, but do you want it?" I was like, "Well, why wouldn't I?" And she said, "Oh, well, I can direct you to this book by what's her name? Pregnancy Child? Nope, that's not it. I'll have to think of it there. Dr. Rachel something. You would know
Rachel
her.
Reed?
It's not Rachel. Oh, maybe it's not Rachel. It's not Rachel. Anyway,
Is it Dr. Sarah Wickham or
Sarah
Sarah Buckley?
Sarah Buckley. There it is, Dr.
Yeah.
Sarah Buckley. Yeah, and
That's
she's
like the Trinity.
I know. There you go. Yeah, and she has a section on ultrasound, and if you're interested in learning more, before you decide to get it or not, then head there. So like, oh, what a weird conversation we just had. And I went and got the book and was like, nope, no, thank you. No more of that for me. But just like you're saying, like the way she presented that conversation, like everything's a choice and there's no judgment either way. And that is a gift. Like, I don't think I have that gift of presenting people with choices and not being like, but this one's terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. And like understanding where we bring our bias in as well is so important. I have lots of clients that, pretty much every client that I work with at some point is going to be like, well, how do you feel about this? And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh man, I don't have a poker face. My face is an open book. So I have to just say, like, okay, well, here's where I have some really clear biases. And I'm just going to be really upfront with you about them, because it's important that you recognize that this is simply just, coming from me and my perspective. But I also have not carried a baby full term. Like, I have not been in the process of, planning for an eventual birth. I just know from the work that I've done and what I've seen, what I feel like I probably would want to avoid or not. But also, it's really different when you're pregnant. So I can't actually even confidently answer what I would or wouldn't do at this point in my life anyways, until I'm actually going through that journey. So, just being really clear and upfront about where you're coming from, and helping people sort of understand as well the language around things, and recognizing like this is your body and your baby, and you are employing the people that are supporting you in your birth. So recognize that you are in that power seat, so to speak. Like, you get to dictate how your care goes to a certain degree, and recognize also the limitations of your care providers, right? Like, you can't just be like, I demand that you do this for me. Like, it doesn't work that way, but it's a relationship that you should be building. And the stronger the relationship is that you have with yourself and your own inner knowing, the stronger you are going to be able to communicate your needs and desires to the people you have in your space, and navigate the options and recommendations that come up for you as well.
Yeah.
Right?
And
Because,
I
like,
like, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, ultimately, midwives or any care provider, like, what releases them from liability to a degree is also being like, had full conversation with client, they declined. Like, there is a part of the system that does sort of teach around how to have coercive conversations, like how to get clients to agree to what you want them to. And it is all around language. But, when people are clear and understand risk and are declining, like, that should be more protected, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, oh man, I kind of lost what I was going to say there a second ago. But the, yeah, I feel like there are two paths people are choosing to birth outside the system and are choosing a free birth. And one is, and it's maybe where, like for me, it's where I started, like I'm birthing outside the system because I can't get what I want in the system. And that's what I was going to say. That's a piece to understand is, like the system is working exactly as it was designed to. It's not broken. This is what it was set up to do. And midwives are part of that system now. That's why it's free for us. That's one of the perks, right? We don't have to pay for it. It's covered by our medical services plan. And that we sometimes go in thinking like, okay, I'm just going to tell them all the things I want and I don't want, and they're going to do that. And sometimes they will, like if you get a midwife who's comfortable with that. But there really is a certain way there's a certain thing they can offer you. And when you go in for that, know that that is what you are choosing. And if you don't want that, they can't offer you a free birth. That's not what they do, right? If you go in and hire a midwife, you're choosing a particular type of birth. If you go in and hire an obstetrician or a surgeon, you're probably choosing a particular type of birth, right? And the choice all lies with you, lies with me. So some people are choosing birth outside the system because what I actually want, I can't get inside the system. And the other avenue of it is people are choosing free birth because they want to fully engage in that process of transformative rite of passage power, hindered by nothing and no one. And to do that, you're birthing outside the system. You're birthing in your own knowing, right? With your own intuition as your guide and trusting that.
Absolutely. It makes me think of, even the term radical responsibility. And one of the first things I learned, like in my gender studies, was about the term itself, radical, meaning from the root. So when you're talking about taking radical responsibility, you're talking about returning to the root of your own knowing and responsibility for your body and its processes, and the practice of engaging really deeply with your own just like communication, like the way that your body is communicating to you. And societally, this is not something that we make any space for whatsoever. And, we also kind of prior talked about how, like, one of the frustrating things that I really despise about living under the patriarchy is the way that women routinely are dismissed. Our healthcare concerns are dismissed. Like, who doesn't have an example of going to a doctor for a particular thing, having to be like, bring so much information and so much self-research to be like, here's what I have come up with, because I don't believe that you're going to, be able to actually give me any kind of like competent care, because it could just be brushed off. There was an example someone gave recently. I read something about like a woman who for years and years and years was going to the hospital with like extreme excruciating pain and was just totally brushed off as like, oh, this woman is hysterical and, XYZ, all of the things. And then when she passed and they did an autopsy, her whole entire abdomen was like riddled with endometriosis, and like to sit with that afterwards and to see that like this was so real for this woman, this pain was real, and the system continually failed her over and over and over and over again because she was looked at as like, oh, you're just a woman and you're just hysterical, or you're just like, this can't possibly be true. We don't see anything from whatever test they may have decided to give, if any at all. And so this is something that people are experiencing over and over and over again, that they don't know their own bodies, or they can't be trusted to tell the truth of their experience, or it's just written off entirely. And our whole structure in society doesn't create any space really for anyone to be embodied. Because what happens when you're embodied? You're so much more in your own power, and that really doesn't sit well with a system that is capitalizing off of your disempowerment.
Yeah.
It creates the insane wealth of so many different industries for us to not know what's going on with our bodies, to not know what's happening inside our own minds and our mental health and XYZ, right? We could just extrapolate that into so many different things. So for people who are starting to really wake up and recognize like, oh, actually that's not true. Like, I do know my own body. I do understand that this is something that we have been doing for a very, very long time. That, yes, while dangerous at some points in history based on, sanitation and different things, like childbirth itself isn't inherently dangerous. And there's a lot of people that would lead you to believe that it is. And if you follow that trail, it's like, well, there's a lot of money in that. And like, literally, the system we live under is called capitalism. It's about capital, it's about money. So you cannot, separate those two things. Like, money is at the root of a lot of these systems. And while the individuals, like we're talking about, I also know so many amazing and beautiful humans who are registered midwives. Also some who are really trying to fight against, from the inside, which is amazing, and like, bless them. But that's just the system and the way it is. It's not an individual issue. It's the way that it was designed was to, disempower and
And
also
creates learned
funnel.
helplessness.
Yes, exactly. That learned helplessness where eventually you just stop looking for a way out. You're just like, well, this is what happens. Like, I'm sure you've probably heard this as well, but people who aren't engaged in this work would be probably very surprised to hear how often somebody says to me, I'd like to have a natural birth if I can. I'd like to try. I'm like, yeah, like, you can have one.
If you want it,
Like,
it is yours.
if you want it, it is yours. And, of course, we talk about all of the things that can come up that do actually create a barrier to having that, dream fulfilled, because it does happen, right? And that is the reason why, like, bless the obstetricians and the surgeons who are there to support really high risk experiences, and, the system that is there for when needed.
But
However,
they are rare.
They're rare.
And
Think about the amount of obstetricians we have in the city and family doctors versus midwives, and how difficult it is to get placements, and how, for example, on the North Shore, like when you were saying earlier about people needing to basically like know the day their period should come and pee on a stick, like in the North Shore, there is one clinic serving the entire North Shore. So if you don't call them by like 3 or 4 weeks, you're not getting a spot. So guess what? You have to just go to the maternity clinic or some other obstetrician that practices, and they have endless privileges. But for a really long time, there was a fight between like, some midwives who are no longer practicing on the North Shore, not wanting to give up their privileges, and new midwives not being able to come in. It's just like, it's so it's so unfair that the system is, designed to just fill itself with, the people who are not there to really support physiologic birth in its entirety.
Which is, again, how it was designed. It's working as it should. A weird, not a weird, like a sort of darker part of this learned helplessness that I've realized in myself is that feeling of helplessness starts to feel good. And like it feels like it's so nice to be taken care of. And it's so nice to abdicate your choice and be like, I don't know what to do. I feel sick. I'm in pain. Like you're pregnant. I'm sick. I'm aching. Someone has told me something is wrong and like the induction must happen. And it feels so good not to have to make the choice and take responsibility for the decision. That is hard. That's really hard. And in our culture, all the way through, we're taught, you can't know, don't do your own research, send that out to someone else, and then just do what they tell you to do. And that leads us to these places of victimhood. Yeah. And that are really hard to step out of. With the baby I just had, she's 2 months now. I was saying I had no midwifery care for that. And I was actually like angry about that for a while and sad. So I registered with Midwives. And then they wanted me to promise that I would not free birth, that I would have them at my birth. I had to promise that. And I was like, I don't really like to be told what to do. and I'm like 4 weeks pregnant and you're like, no, but you have to have us there. And I knew like they're lovely people and they're afraid.
I don't know if you can hear that. I have to apologize. There is an animal living in the walls of my apartment.
No way.
And it just taps. Like, I don't know
terrifying.
what it's doing in there. It's like, it's infuriating. So apologies to listeners and to you if you can hear it, but it is like, it wakes me up in the morning and then apparently, afternoon, like lunchtime, it's just time to create some kind of something in there. I don't know. So anyways.
That's very interesting. We're going to need an update on that. She discovered what it is.
I know. I'm going to even like try to just move around the corner so that maybe it's just not as out and present on this recording. Anyways, continue.
Yeah. So just that, just speaking to that victimhood piece and how I felt like a victim and being like, I can't have midwifery care. And I had to really sit and like do some, like, that was kind of part of my prenatal work in the first trimester to be like, I mean, I could have prenatal care. I could agree to the rules. I could. So like, am I really being refused prenatal care? Am I a victim to this? Or have I made a sovereign choice to be like, no, thank you. I don't want that kind of prenatal care. Yeah, it's like reframing it for yourself is quite powerful. But yeah, that was a hard piece for me to move through. Just feeling like I was being victimized by that system. And really, I'm making my choices and I'm taking responsibility for my choices. And the safest thing I know I can do for my baby is to sit with my own intuition. And in that moment, I was like, I can't make that promise. And I'm not really willing to lie about it. So,
yeah, I respect the hell out of that. And really, like, I can empathize with that as well, because that shouldn't be a choice that you have to make. Because I think that there are people who are like, you can hear that?
It's so funny.
It's so loud. And I've been banging on the wall, like banging back, being like, knock it off. Like, please, I'm busy here. Come back later. Like, I don't even know how they got in. It's just
It's
so,
great.
anyways. We're probably gonna have to maybe like edit out parts of this.
I like it. It's authentic.
Or what is it, a squirrel? Is it a bird? I don't know, but maybe they have a lot of thoughts on sovereign
like,
birth.
Hello.
Yeah, listen, nature knows what to do. Like, but yeah, there's something about this sort of grief that comes up, and I really appreciate that you brought that up, of like feeling victimized, but also feeling the sense of grief that you aren't going to be given care that aligns with you or that you're really needing or wanting. There's coercion in that. Like having someone tell you, you have to promise that you're going to call us, otherwise we can't, because it's like, well, then what happens in the postpartum period when you don't call them and then they need to come over, and you're wanting that care, if you are wanting that care once the birth happens, and then you've got these like really salty midwives coming in, making you feel really bad about the choices that you've made. Like that's not a great option either. So there is this sense of like loss of what people were maybe expecting that can be similar to, wow, that is so fucking distracting. I don't know what to do about that.
It's okay.
I need you to stop. All right. Okay. And we're back.
Yes. So in thinking about that, so there's a perception of what prenatal care is. I've always thought of it as like you measure my belly and you take my blood pressure. I go and get blood tests. I'll get check see if I have gestational diabetes. I'll get these ultrasounds, and this is prenatal care. And in this last pregnancy of having like no prenatal care in air quotes, I had to think about like, okay, like, do I want any part of that? Because I could just go to a walk-in and get those things if I want them. Like, what am I actually like really sad about not having? And it was like, I actually don't care. I don't care about those things. I wanted, I actually like just like visiting with those midwives. They're really fun. And I like sitting and talking to them about myself, and sort of feeling cared for in that way. That was part of me settling my like, my perceived victimhood. There's like seeing what I want and knowing I can source it for myself. And I just wanted, speak to, what do you think true prenatal care is? Because I've definitely come to the conclusion that that is not true prenatal care. That's, like those things are, your body is going to grow a baby, a beautiful, healthy baby. And if something goes awry there, you'll know that you need to seek some assistance. But your body is going to do it. So then what is like the prenatal time? What is the work?
That's such a good question, and such a, I think like even an ever evolving, it's an ever evolving question and answer. But the way that I see true prenatal care is really being able to connect with people and get to know people as who they are, their desires, what they're wanting out of their pregnancy, and like, helping to educate them maybe on the things that they internally know, but don't maybe have the words for. Like, what's happening inside of your body? Let's measure your belly. Here, let's palpate. Can you feel this? This is what's happening. Oh, like this is where your baby's positioned. All of these different things that you can really invite people into their own care and increase their own body literacy in ways that they don't already have, right? Because they have inner knowing, they have the sensations and experiences, they have all of that awareness. But you can help to strengthen and improve that by, teaching them something that maybe that you've learned, that you're able to pass along and create this sort of stronger knowing, as well as helping to understand what they are really looking for in their experience. What's important to you? How do you want to feel when you give birth? Like, how do you want to feel when you give birth? How do you want to, like, what's important to you? What are your values? What are your, how do you live your life? What is, like, I talk to clients a lot about, like, what are the core values that you live your life by? And what would you say the top ones are that you want to invite into your birth space? So that no matter what happens, because of course, everything is beyond our control. And as humans, we love to have this idea that we're in control and that we can, make sure that everything sort of goes according to our very detailed, specific plans. And we're really not. Like, nothing's within our control. But what we can control is how we prepare and how we show up for ourselves. And so having those conversations with the people that you're inviting into your space for birth is so important. And I think that's part of prenatal care, getting to know and sharing your values and having a very human conversation in that way around, like shared values or where maybe your values differ a little bit and really human to human connection. One of my mentors that I've learned from talks about like the spiral as being a part of the prenatal care, where you are moving through the spiral of a person's life to really understand who they are, their history, where they've come from, and how that impacts who they are today. What things are they carrying with them that will potentially show up in birth? Because there is something it's like so mystical and so magical, because every time I see somebody giving birth, they lose all of these sort of built up like masks and personas, and they return to this it's almost childlike, this essence of who they are. And you're like, wow, I am witnessing like probably the truest version of you, because you have no ability to uphold any of these other things anymore. Like there is no like space and capacity for you to continue to kind of keep these masks on that we all have, right? We all have them as we've grown and recognized like the way that we need to be in the world in order to get the things that we want and need. And it's just, yeah, it's really something that strips you down. And being able to have the privilege of knowing some of those things and knowing what makes up the essence of a person, that is so valuable in knowing how to provide care.
So true.
Knowing how to show up for them in their birth.
I think of birth, like from the births I've been to, I just see it's like the great equalizer. Like, I don't care how much money you have. I don't care how much education you have. I don't care how old or young you are. Like, I've been to births of teenagers and it's like people in their 40s. And no, you're the same. Like, we come to the bottom of ourselves. Like, it takes literally everything, not a drop more, though. Like, you can do it, but it takes literally everything you have to get through that moment, to get through that transition into the motherhood of that child. And it's like, it's a truly magical thing to witness. And you're right, it's like the truest version of yourself, fully stripped down. Like there's no time to be nice or to be like the sort of person I like to present myself as and that I like to think I am. She's an illusion, right? And there aren't very many things in life that strip you right down to like the bare essence of who you are. And yeah, I love that as advice to care providers, and like, how can you support someone in birth? And when I think of it as like, what would I say to a person who's pregnant? Like, what is your work in prenatal care? I think like the same, like trying to strip down to like what really matters, like you were saying. And also like anything that can bring you to your intuition, to practice that, to know like, sometimes it's hard to tell, okay, am I afraid in this moment? Or am I considering this intervention because I have a knowing that I need help right now? Like, is that my intuition? Or is that this like higher level fear that I have because it's scary to take responsibility and I've also been conditioned that I don't know, right? And so to spend the time, whatever that is, like what connects you, to that like deep, solid, stable knowing in yourself, so that you can recognize it when it comes up. And in another way, like there's no work in pregnancy. Like it's going to do it. The baby's going to come out. It's going to be okay. But to do it in power where you could experience less fear, because it can feel really scary. I feel like it's had scary moments. Like, not genuinely scary for my life. It's scary if you're like, whoa, this is taking a lot. It's taking a lot of my fortitude
Yeah,
to do this.
absolutely.
Yeah, doing those, like spending time with those kinds of things.
Those questions. Yeah, I think it's so, because you're so right. I tell people all the time, like, remember that birth is an extension of pregnancy. And in pregnancy, you don't go to a clinic every week and get hooked up to a machine to like feed you the things that you need for the next week of growth and development, right? Like your body is doing that on its own with no input from external places. So know that that also can happen in your birth as well. And I tell people, like, you could give birth on your own without anyone there because your body would just be doing it for you. However, I don't believe that is how you should birth. I think that birth, if that is your desire, being surrounded by people who like radically believe in you and your abilities and trust your capacity and understand how you are going to meet the edges of yourself and the edges of your own capacity and what you believe that you are capable of. And you are going to push past those and be absolutely in awe and wowed at your ability. You had asked a question prior to this conversation about like, is 9 months enough to prepare? And I think in a lot of cases, no, but also yes. Like if
Yeah.
you are engaged in that, that deep work from the beginning and you're allowing, each wave of transformation to come through you and to sort of grow with your body and your baby in your awareness, then yes. But also, we shouldn't be just learning about this the moment we find out that we're pregnant. And this is what's different about society now versus society, a couple hundred years ago or even like 100 years ago. Like people would see birth happen like when they were small. They would be involved in birth. Like families would be involved in birth. You'd probably see, yeah, just like birth happening as a very normal experience in life. And so you wouldn't necessarily be afraid of it by the time it was your turn. You'd be like, great, it's my turn.
Yeah.
Like there would be so much knowledge that would just be passed down simply by just being present and around. But nowadays, we live so individually. We're really locked away in our own little compartments, and we don't see or experience birth often until it's our own. And so the only other time we've been a part of a birth is when we were born, and we don't have conscious memory of that. So we're going into it like really super blind. And, that is something that I think it's really been taken away from us, as
That's the way that,
humans.
like, 9 months is not enough. Like, it's totally enough. It's totally fine and can totally be fine. Like, it's fine. But it
Absolutely.
feels like not enough in the way that there's so much stripping down to do. Like, there's no experience we're coming in with. Probably never even thought about
Mhm.
these things until you're pregnant and you're like, "Oh, shoot. Like, what are the options even?" And then
Mhm.
stripping down of, like, the learned helplessness and victimhood that we're taught our whole lives. And then in this space, there's a deep invitation to let that go, that you can accept or not, again, in your
Mhm.
own autonomous choice. And like you were
Mhm.
saying in that way, like you don't need your body's growing your baby without any intervention. None of those things in like typical prenatal care are doing that for you. Your body's doing it. And you were saying, you tell people in birth,
Mhm.
not to worry about that it's going to be exactly the same. Yeah, and the same I think is true for postpartum.
Mhm.
There we go. Yeah, the same I think is true for postpartum. That that knowing can come through. And so in thinking of that, tell me what are your yeah, like I feel like postpartum is often overlooked, so I wanted to just like have like a little highlight on that
Mhm.
before we check out. That like women often spend a lot of time doing some sort of work that they feel is necessary, or like going to all their appointments or something in their prenatal period, and they're preparing for birth, and then it'll be fine. And like postpartum is a really big deal. It's a really big
It
extension
is a
of
very,
pregnancy and
very
birth.
big deal.
Mhm.
Yeah. And the labor and birth is just the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's something I really stress to people is you can, you go to classes and you're engaged in this very deep transformational work of, like you said, the stripping down and the meeting yourself and the strengthening that communication and that bodily attunement. And then postpartum comes and it's like you get hit by a truck. Like your body is so like physically exhausted,
Mm.
emotionally exhausted. The whole process is just so taxing on the system and on your, energy reserves. And then you've got all of these hormonal changes happening. And then you have this tiny human that you are tasked with keeping alive. And they have so many needs and you don't know them yet. You don't, you're just learning. So this again is why I feel like it's really like my calling in life, my life's mission to help people understand how important it is to preserve those instincts and keep those instincts intact because of how important they are in the process of early parenthood. Because you are absolutely stretched to your limit. You are at your edges as a capacity in a physical, mental, and emotional sense. And so, also having a village, creating a village if you can, and of course, it's also hard these days. People are living, far away from families or don't have communities. And, in Vancouver, I think it's a shared experience that if you come from a different place, it's often really hard to make friends here. Like it's not the friendliest city in the world. So,
Yeah.
being in this state, it's hard to be isolated, right? We're not meant to do this alone. We were not meant to do this even with just two people.
No,
And again, we
really
also
no.
know in this economy as well, like not everyone has the ability to even take time off. So like often one partner is working and then you've just got one person caring for a baby after the most physically strenuous and intense experience they've ever had in their lives. So, what do we do for that? How do we ensure that people are moving into this space feeling empowered and feeling capable and trusting themselves and knowing what needs to be done? Because growing up, the only thing I ever heard about postpartum, first of all, I have to say that I didn't actually know that you birthed the placenta till I was in my 20s.
Me either. I was pregnant with my first baby and was like, "Sorry, what? You bleed for a while after you have a baby?" Like, no one said like, and I'm like, "Obviously," but, like, no one said that. I'm like, "Why would you
No one,
bleed? Just the baby comes out."
yeah, nobody
Yes.
told me that there was a whole ass
Yeah.
placenta that you birth at the end of it.
There's
And
2
I was just
births,
like,
always.
yeah, there's two. And, so even like recognizing that, it's just like, whoa, we are so wildly uninformed about what happens. And then, so really building, if you can, like a village of people who understand what's needed, right? Like there's so much emotional nurturing that needs to happen, physical nurturing that needs to happen, the importance of nutrition, the importance of rest. And now I'm realizing why I initially said that about the placenta thing was because the only thing that I ever really heard about when I was growing up was like how to bounce back and get into your
Yeah.
pre-pregnancy genes.
No.
Who gives
Yeah.
a shit? Like, really? Who cares? Like, your body has just done this miraculous thing. And I know there's, this whole conversation right now about like body neutrality, body positivity, like, et cetera, et cetera. But really, it's like that emphasis on like what your body looks like is really just a byproduct of, again, this capitalist
Mm.
hellscape that we live in, where we can't recognize miracles for what they are and how transformation changes you physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. So, like, yeah, your body shouldn't look the same. It's probably not going to, but there's a reason for that. You now have to sustain human life. So why don't we talk about how we can nurture your body to nurture your baby so we can keep you healthy and keep you strong for the endurance that you need. It's like a never-ending marathon. You're sleeping maybe an hour or two, like in between feeds, if that. Some people are luckier and get longer stretches. Some people get less. Some people are like, well, I managed about 30 minutes and then I had to wake up again because my baby was hungry and they feed for a long time, or there's latch problems, like all of these things. So for me, to start with postpartum, the ideal is having a village, and more wise women that come in and know how to sit with you, how to soothe, just even with your energy, right? Just coming in and being like, I am a regulated nervous system who is very well slept, and I am here to offer you that support. I'm going to make you some food. I'm going to throw a load of laundry in. I'm going to unload your dishwasher. I'm going to, stock your fridge with something, or I'm going to come over and be useful for you. I'm not going to come over and sit on your couch and have you like hold your baby while you make me tea, while you're like bleeding and dripping and, fluids are everywhere and you haven't showered, like we really need to know how to show up for people in this way and hold them really tenderly in this place of transformation and vulnerability. And they're just so delicate. Like people who give birth, families are also newborns. And we don't treat them that way. And do you know how hard it is to become a newborn when you're an adult? Like,
Yeah,
like
it's
we
very
have no
demoralizing.
frame of, yeah, you have no frame of reference for that. There's no, like, yeah, there's no way to conceptualize what that feels like, to feel like so brand new and raw and cracked open, even if you had the most magical birth of all time. It does not, remove the possibility that you could go through this incredibly emotional, overwhelming experience because you're integrating this newness that you're, walking into, as well as this massive responsibility of caring for a human being.
Yes. What I've heard time and time again from moms and within my own experience is like I feel fully capable generally of taking care of my new baby. And some people, like, it's nice to have support with that too if you're feeling unsure, but I have felt capable of caring for my new baby, but I cannot care for myself. I cannot
Yes.
like get myself food, and I really need food, and I really need hydration, and I really need even someone just to sit with me and witness what's happening. And that's what I really want. That's what I have really wanted in the postpartum period. And like some like my favorite gifts from people for sure, like outside of any, like of all the gifts I was given in postpartum, was someone showing up with like a meal for me to eat. And I would just sit in my bed and maybe they would hold my baby and we'd chat and I would eat this food that they lovingly prepared for me or stopped and got takeout or something. And that's just like
Yes.
the best, like nurturing gifts. Those kind of gifts, like how does your mom take care of you when you're a little kid and you're sick? And like what felt amazing? That feels amazing again.
Yes, having someone come over and really be there for you. And I think one of the biggest and most like rewarding things is when somebody makes you feel so at ease with their presence that you're like not falling into that like, oh, I need to host you. It's like, no, they're just there and they're there to really just support you because it's
And
so
even
true.
just
Like,
doing it. Like, was your mom ever like, "Well,
yeah,
I don't know. Do you need your temperature taken? Do you want tea? Do you want" like, no, she was just like, "I got things." Like, she
yeah,
brings it in,
I'm
and that's
here.
yeah, I just
Yeah,
brought
like
it all.
go
Eat
through
it or
people's
don't.
cupboards.
Yeah.
Totally. Like avail yourself to everything in their home because nobody is going to be like, ooh, like, please don't go. It's just like you just open the cupboards. Like, where is the teapot? Where is, where do you keep your teas? I'm just going to be making myself busy in here. Like, please just stay doing what you're doing. And, I'm just going to bring you water. Like, I often, when I'm visiting clients, like, I'll just get up and get them things. I'm like, oh, your water's running low, and you're sitting there with your baby and we're talking like you just need that filled up. And, while I'm in the kitchen, I'm like, hey, can I grab you a snack? Are you hungry right now? When was the last time you ate? And, sometimes they're like, oh, no, I'm okay. Yeah, I ate like 2 hours ago. I'm like, oh, great. Well, it's time for a snack. So I'm going to make one, put it by you. If you don't want it, no problem, but it's there. Almost every single time someone's like, start snacking. When you just put a snack
Totally.
beside
And it,
them,
like, feeds
right?
your soul. It's not just feeding your stomach. It's like it feels so good to be
No.
nurtured all the time. Who doesn't like that?
Yes.
But in postpartum
Yes.
partum, it's like, no, I need, like, I must have that. It's
You
difficult to
need
do
to
without it.
really, yeah, there's the archetype of mother where, everyone needs to be mothered in that way, right? That
Yes.
nurturing, caring, especially when you are in this place of rawness, and partners too. Like they're often also just completely mind blasted by like what just happened. And, they have a lot of work to do. And that could be an entirely different podcast
Mhm.
episode about like how partners can prepare and what's important for them to know going into this. But they also need that nurturing because they're doing a lot of nurturing that maybe wasn't a part of their everyday prior to this, and so they feel like they've been thrown in the deep end a little bit. And so coming in and just being like, even just like putting your hands on their shoulders and like, take a deep breath. You're doing a great job. Let me get both of you
Mhm.
something. How about you both get into bed? Or like, how can I support you in like, what are you needing right now? Sometimes I've had clients who the partners are like, I would love to go outside on a run, or like, I would love to go on a walk, but like, I don't want to leave, my partner because like
Mhm.
she needs a lot. So like there's this ability to meet the needs of both simply by just being there and being comfortable in that space. And yeah, just it doesn't always have to look like these practical steps, because holding space for people,
Mhm.
hearing their stories, not necessarily, telling something back or, having a conversation, but really deeply listening. How did their birth go? They wanna talk about it no matter what. If it went
Yep.
amazing and it was the highlight of their life, or if it went horribly awry and they're feeling this massive grief about it, they wanna talk about it. So we
Yeah, you
need
need to
to be
process your
able.
story right away.
Exactly. We need to be able to, as a society, like, learn how to hold space for one another.
They're
Because
like
when we hold that in, that's where it spills out on
yeah.
other pregnant people down the line, and then we're just, like, trauma dumping constantly.
It's true, and, like, given how our society is, I feel like the message here is, like, hire the postpartum doula. Like, get the postpartum doula
Yes.
for
Yes.
where things sit, and then speaking of that, just as we're, like, finishing up here, I just, like, share a little bit about, like, your birth work. Where do people find you? What kind of things are you offering
Mm,
right now? Tell us about that.
mhm. So, I don't know, where do people find me? I think, like, referrals, word of mouth. I have a website, so my business is called Homebody Holistic Birth, because you house your baby in your body, but also I'm a big
Mhm.
homebody. So that name just felt very,
I love it.
very personal to me. So you can find me at my website, www.homebodybirth.ca, or on Instagram. And right now, I offer birth and postpartum doula services, as well as loss of abortion services. Um, that is on a sliding scale, sort of pay, what you would like, especially when it comes to what I like to call releasing a pregnancy, because I think language is really important.
Mm,
And loss doesn't necessarily speak to the process of, a pregnancy release, whether it's spontaneous or chosen. Um, but yeah, again, that could also just be a whole nother podcast. But
mhm.
yeah, I'm really, really just drawn to and passionate about working with families who are really wanting a sovereign experience. And that can be, choosing to work with registered midwives. I do still support people in hospital settings, although my preference is to be at home. I also support, people who are looking to free birth. Um, And as far as postpartum goes, I'm also just so deeply just privileged, when people want to invite me into their homes, into that really vulnerable space with them to, you know, sit and be witness to their transformation and be in service to them in the practical ways and also in the more cosmic ways. I'm an amateur astrologer. I'm also read tarot and oracle cards and things like that. And I really love to bring magic into day-to-day life. And so that's something that I like to offer to people as well, because it's been a really anchoring guide for me, like a lighthouse in my own personal development, to really have these tools to deepen my own insight. And I feel like I can really bring that to, the space when you're processing a big transformation like birth, or, you're integrating and moving into your postpartum period. So,
Oh, well, thank you.
yeah.
I love having this chat with you.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you so much for having me. And I'm so excited to see, how this grows and all the chats that are coming up for you as well. So I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. Please subscribe and share with friends if you enjoyed this content. Write us a review. It's really the best way to support this movement of more powerful, peaceful births. You can check out the show notes for where to connect with Carissa. And if you have a birth story that you would like to share on this podcast, the details are also in the show notes.